แต่ของแบบเสียกลางวันอ่ะมันเป็นแบบภาพที่ยาวมัน
Can I ask you, sorry, can I ask you a question? Would it bother the video if we were to open the windows? And I just want to put some posters on the wall, but I don't want to disturb your lighting.
Cool.
Like, could I open those windows, those curtains? It's okay? These curtains I want to open.
Open window.
Curtains?
ไม่ต้องเปิดก็ได้มั้งพี่เพราะว่าถ้าเปิดแล้วผมว่าถ้าเปิดแล้วมันจะสว่าง
I want to open the curtains so we can put posters up on the wall.
อ๋อได้ครับ
Unless it'll hurt his lighting.
นึกว่าจะไม่มีปัญหาได้
It's okay? I have died. Good.
พอจะเปิดให้ติดกระดาษติดเลยกลัวแตกเขาถ่ายกลับมาไงเขาไม่อยากเป็นผู้ถูกกระทำคนเดียว
We're ready to start. So I was asked to talk about the relationship between field biologists and wildlife vets. And I'd like to start with saying that I've worked with wildlife vets and I've worked with zoo vets. And I would prefer not to work with zoo vets, but I like to work with wildlife vets. And so the reason is that there's some real differences between working with free-ranging animals and working in zoos. And when I work with wildlife vets, they understand the conditions that we work under. So I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, you all will have a lot of experience working with field biologists here in Thailand and make a strong relationship. You have a lot to teach them, and I think also they have a lot of experience in the field, so they have something to teach you. All right, I'm going to illustrate my talk with some of the research that's been done by Saksit Simcharian, Atra Simcharian, and their colleagues at Kanaram Research Station. So, first I'd like to deal with some special issues in working with free-ranging animals. First, we have a problem. How do you get close to the animal? It's not a problem in the zoo. They walk up to their cage. And the second is some of the equipment we use be a little different. To demonstrate that, I have the oldest, most crude immobilization rifle there is. A lot of people don't like to use this anymore, but we'll talk about that. Okay, the first question that we have is, how do you decide what drugs to use and what drug dosage is when it's a free-ranging animal? So if you go to a zoo situation, you look at the animal, maybe you've already immobilized it in the past, you have weights, maybe you can look at it and size it up. Sometimes when we go out, we don't know whether it's going to be a male, female, young or old animal. And so one of the techniques we use is we look for tracks. And then we try to judge the size of the animal based on its tracks. So if you have to base it on tracks, that may limit the types of drug you use, because you want a drug with a wide latitude. I think it's called lethal, the ratio of lethal to LD50, yes, okay, thanks, Felicia. So you want a wide LD50. And the other thing is you need a fairly quick induction time, because in free-ranging animal can go a long way. In Wake-Out King, if an animal goes 200 meters, you probably won't find it in many places in dense vegetation. So you need quick induction time, you need a drug with a big latitude, and then you don't want any sudden recoveries. There's a drug that many people are using now, became very popular for tigers. It was a mixture of ketamine and metatomidine. The first I heard about this was from a wildlife biologist in Russia who immobilized more than 30 tigers, and one day he had a tiger wake up and come at him. He was very lucky to survive. The next story I heard was in a zoo in Omaha, and that zoo vet wasn't so lucky. The animal woke up quickly and chewed off a good part of his arm. He still doesn't have complete use of his arm. So metatomidine is a popular drug now. It's reversible. It has a lot of good qualities, but it's not one to use in the wild, because you can't afford to have an animal wake up. Now, the next question I have is, can you be on hand to help field biologists? You have to try to be there, spend some time with field biologists, but there's no way you can be there all the time, because sometimes it might take me 2 months to catch a tiger when I'm working with Saxon. You don't want to sit in the field doing nothing for 2 months. So now we have a big obligation, because field biologists do not have your training. There's a lot they can learn from you. And at the same time, you have to train them as best you can. So at the end of our talk, we're going to talk a little bit about the strategy you might have to create a relationship with field biologists so they can learn from you. Well, I started off by saying that we don't really know the weight of the animal, and so we used a drug called Tilazol. Tilazol and ketamine are cyclohexanes, and they're dissociative anesthesias with a wide latitude. You could probably use 10 or 15 times the dose to immobilize an animal, it would still be fine. So we usually load darts in the morning. We try to look for tracks. If it's a female-sized track, we have a ballpark drug dosage. We have a ballpark drug dosage for males, and we load them ahead of time. So since we're guessing at the weight, we're guessing at the drug dosage, it's a good thing to remember sometimes when you're in the field not to start pulling out the drug, maybe to give a little more and trying to measure to the nearest hundredth of a milligram. Get the job done. That's another. So we had 3 drug doses we use, and these were developed in Nepal. Tigers are a little bit bigger there, so here we use about 500 milligrams for females as our drug dose. And just as an example, I once made a mistake, and I darted a young cub with an adult male drug dose. So it was 1,000 milligrams in a male that weighed 84 kilograms. It did just fine. So my mistake illustrates the big latitude. Okay, the first step to capturing an animal is finding out where it is and trying to get close to it. And so we often just search for animal sign, tracks, spray marks, things like that. And in Thailand, we actually put out a bait, snares, and so the animal comes to us. I'm going to talk a little bit about a technique in Nepal, and I think it's relevant because we just used it last week here in Thailand. So we're looking at where you might find animals, and then we put out a bait near a travel lane. In this case, we need to put it near dense cover because we tie it with a rope that the tiger can break. It pulls the dead animal into deep forest, and then we can approach it. I couldn't understand you, Dr. Partey, but I looked at some of the slides, and he just talked about some of the ethical issues. So last year, I had to fill out an animal care form. It was a renewal. I filled out one before, and they didn't ask this question. But this time they asked not about the care of the tiger, but the ethical issues with the bait, the cow, or in this case, water buffalo. And so I responded, and we classify the pain to animals as A, B, and C. A is virtually no pain. B would be when you immobilize an animal. So there's some restraint, but it's fairly minor. And C is very great pain. A is also when you euthanize an animal, because if you euthanize an animal correctly, it's supposed to be painless. So my answer with the live bait was that about 80% of the cows killed were Class A. And that's simply because a tiger is just as efficient at dispatching cows as you might be if you're going to euthanize a cow. But about 20% of the time, it is Class C because they grab the animal by the throat and they just strangle it. It takes about 2 minutes to strangle it. It's interesting, if you watch a tiger killing, it won't move for about 4 minutes. It bites it on the neck, its both paws are out, and it lays its head right down on the ground and just doesn't move. And it really makes you think that tigers are fairly cautious. So that passed my animal care committee. One of the other questions they had is, well, wait a minute, it's not fair that you put out a cow. Even if it's Class A, you're putting out the cow. You're manipulating, you're involved. And my answer was that, yes, I am. And when a tiger kills a deer, I'm not involved. But I answered that ethically, I can't see the difference. One cow dies, one deer dies, they die both painlessly. I don't consider it interfering. Fortunately, the Animal Care Committee in Minnesota has agreed with that, and so that's a big step. All right, this is a Nepalese drive technique. We put out cloth. They're in 40-meter bundles. They're about 1.5 meters wide, and we stretch them out. They form a psychological deterrent. And in this scene, you can see the white cloth here. I took that picture to show you what the bead cloth looks like. This isn't the way you would do it. In fact, that wouldn't work because the cloth needs to be in dense vegetation so the tiger doesn't see it until it gets very close. If it sees a long stretch of white cloth, it'll just stop. If there are elephants pushing, it'll stay there till the elephants get close and charge the elephants. In our case, last week in Thailand, we were driving the tiger on foot, and that would be doubly bad because the tiger would turn and charge the people beating. We hide the cloth so that the tiger gets very close to this wall, and even though you can't see the tiger, it'll hit us, boom! That means it was kind of surprised and turns the other way. And this is the diagram. So that the bait was here, the elephants come along. In our case, we drove it with people, and the animal bumps into the drive cloth and eventually comes near the dart gun. And this might be a typical view when the animal's coming through. If you do this right, the animal's walking, stopping every few paces, look around and listen. So it's very easy to immobilize. And then for safety, we often put someone behind the dart gunner to see which way the animal's going afterwards. This is critical because now you have to go out and find the animal. In Nepal, we go out and look for the animal from elephant back. The other day in Thailand, we had to go look for where the animal was on foot. Could be exciting. Okay, let's go to the system developed for Thailand. Because the terrain is often very rugged, we decided to go to snaring. That's what they do in Russia. If the terrain was flat and we could have well-trained elephants, that first technique in Nepal would be much more effective because we get to see who's coming along and we get to decide who to dart. Anyway, this is a snare made by Fornchai. Maybe some of you met him. He developed this. It's light. You can just carry 4 or 5 snares. It's very, very fast, and it's really just a neat system. Sometimes we set a corral, I'll show it to you in a minute, and make doorways when the tiger comes in, steps on the snare. Sometimes we just put out a cow, let it kill, and then we hope the tiger will come back the next day, and then we snare him. So this is a set snare. You can see it here, and there it is, camouflage. We put a guide in to try to get the animal to step in the right place. Wildlife biologists have lots of strategies. Some people just try to figure out where the animal's going to step, and they don't guide it too much. And some people put guiding logs and twigs and thorns, and everybody develops their own strategy. This is the situation I just mentioned to you with the corral. So there's the doorway, and the stairs right here. Tigers learn pretty fast, and so when you set up a snare, you don't want to miss. If you miss, sometimes the tiger learns right off the bat, so you're sort of in trouble. We're working on a tiger right now that we collared. Collar worked for about 2 months, and suddenly went off the air. We wrote back to the company. They were nice enough to send us a new collar, but now this tiger's a little too smart for us, so we've been having trouble. Okay, the first issue in the tropics when you catch an animal is controlling temperature. And all the cats seem to get elevated temperature. I don't think they're getting an elevated temperature from the anesthesia itself. It's just their behavior. They're doing nothing to cool themselves. And in this case, we have a tarp over the animal. What's wrong with that? Think of some reason why this was a big mistake. Yes. What? Heat stroke. Heat stroke, yeah. Okay, heat stroke, yeah. Okay, but we put the tarp to prevent heat stroke. What's wrong with using a tarp to provide shade? That's my question. Looks like a good idea.
How big is the tarp?
You're giving hints over there.
I am giving hints.
No hints.
Few hints.
What happens if the animal rolls over a little bit? Gets a little bit awake, now is a little bit dangerous, and rolled over into the sun. Now you got a problem, right? It's already overheating, it's in the sun, you're going to dart it again, and then move it into the shade. So this was a mistake I made, I'm sharing with you, with the dart, with the shade. We never use a tarp for sunshade. We pick the animal up and we move it to somewhere where there's deep shade, natural cover, big enough area so that if it rolls around, it's not going to end up in the sun. I mean, you could lose a tiger really quickly if it ends up in the sun, so that's important. Other thing that we found here in Thailand is we often go out and we check the snares at night. We've begun to mobilize at night. And in the hot season, we go out, we start out about 4:30 in the morning, and we go out by flashlight. We want to get the mobilization done before it heats up. And once it gets sunlight in the hot season, we just close the snares. It's also, because the animal can roam around, you have to be very, very quiet when it starts to wake up, because you don't want it stumbling off. It may stumble down through the forest, get near water, get near a drop-off, so you have to be careful that way. So I already talked about this. The cyclohexanes are pretty safe, and I just wanted to throw this in as a demonstration of how safe it is. So this tiger started to wake up. It was still immobilized well enough to be completely safe, and instead of giving more drug, we just finished doing the radio collaring. And while they sat there and kind of looked around like this, during this time we were very quiet. And sometimes, this is how we got that ballpark figure of 1,000 milligrams. We'd immobilize several male tigers when we came across this tiger, and we decided that this was an extra large animal, and we needed to look at the tracks again. When we found an animal like this, we went up to 1,000 milligrams. All right. All of you have a role in training field biologists, and I think it's important. Most field biologists don't have much experience drawing blood. If you went through vet school, you probably drew blood on a house cat. If you can draw blood on a house cat, I'm sure you can teach wildlife biologists to draw blood from an animal as large as a tiger. But that's a skill. Most wildlife biologists wouldn't know how to handle wounds. If it's a puncture wound, what do you do? You sew it up? Come on, somebody tell me. Give a guess.
Did everyone understand the question? Puncture wound? Okay.
A puncture wound is a deep, straight wound. Something goes in deep like that. Let's say it goes in that far. You got a free-ranging tiger. You only have it with you a short time, and you have a puncture wound like that. What do you think the treatment would be? Somebody give a guess.
It's being with the process to give the sauce and some disinfection or antiseptic to put into the wound.
Okay, and then would you suture it?
Yes.
I don't think so, because if it's a deep wound, they may want to drain. So with a deep wound like that, you might want to leave it open. If it's a puncture wound, the opening may be small enough. It may heal over okay without a suture, and so you don't want fluid to build up. If it's a long wound, you pretty much have to sew it up, right? So we need to think about that, because if it's an animal in the wild, I suppose if it's badly injured, you might want to bring it out of the wild. That's a big step. If it's a small injury, then you need to figure out how to treat it and whether you're going to leave it in the wild or not. Animals are pretty good. A tiger's not likely to get an infection in a wound where it can lick. They have a big raspy tongue, and they're going to lick away any infection, any flies or anything like that. But that's the kind of help that you guys can give to field biologists. Also, sometime in the field, I mean, this is the same thing if you work in a captive setting. You need to have, everyone has to have a job, you have to have data forms. But it's sometimes a little more important in the wild, because you may be a little more excited about the situation. What we do is everyone is assigned a task that they have to do every time before you go out. I like that because I'm an old forgetful man, and so everyone else is assigned a task that they have to do. All I have to do is come along. But seriously, if someone brings the scale, someone brings the water and alcohol for cooling and a fan, somebody brings the drugs and the medicines. Everybody has a job to do, and it just makes it easier. And then cooling is the #1 thing in the wild. So there's one person that's just assigned to monitor temperature and breathing rate. And then the rest of us can go about our task, and that person is constantly recording out. We have a data recorder. Doesn't do anything, make sure to get all the data. So those kind of steps, they're just as important in an operating theater or in a zoo situation. But you can see sometimes we're excited and wild, and that helps. So I think as more people, wildlife biologists, want to immobilize animals, they need some help from you guys to get some training. And hopefully in your job then you'll be able to work with wildlife biologists and give them some of the basic training. So here's an example. We got our data recorder. Don is just, his whole job is to monitor the temperature. We cover the animal so the sunlight doesn't get on it. And here we've used a soft link so that the collar will wear out and fall off. And if we're lucky, this is what we end up with. This was the first GPS collar tiger. It's actually a picture from Nepal. Nowadays, we have much lighter GPS collars than this. But it's kind of interesting. You can see the large cub in the background, and she actually had 4 cubs. So it was interesting to see a mom raising 4 cubs. In this case, it was in 17 square kilometers. So it was a tiny home range, which meant there was very, very good food. And there's just a close-up of that weak link collar. We just used the blue jean material and a couple of layers. So the tiger, almost strong enough, if it wanted to, it could rip it off. But it doesn't, it works, it wears out after a few months, the collar comes off. Fitting the collar, we just have a standard practice is that 2 people will work hard and get the collar on there. They'll check it, put their hand under it, decide it's right. And then a second person, not those 2, will go and check the collar. You don't want to end up collaring an animal too tight. Right? So we really have to be careful. Once I had a sub-adult tiger, and it could not wear an adult collar, but it was a little bit big, and I didn't think this weak link collar would work. So I decided what to do is I decided to take a collar from a full-size animal. And it was a little bit of a gamble because I could just slip that collar over the tiger's head. So I knew it wasn't going to be too small, and you would think, well, the tiger will take it off. It didn't, and so it grew into it, and we got some good information. All right, a couple of other things that are important. Here we're looking at reproductive status. This is real important because if we catch a tiger and if the nipples are pink, that's an indication that it hasn't bred yet. They turn very dark. And so we know whether we have a young dispersing animal or a young animal that's just settled. And here's where all of us field biologists could use some help. I've got 2 shots of teeth here, but we don't really have a good chronology of the replacement of the deciduous canines with the adult canines. So as you're working, anybody working on tigers, if you could take some pictures of that canine replacement and note the age, that'd be very helpful. So, just kind of for dramatic effect, this is a very big male, and look at that guy's fingers up there and give you an idea of the size of that canine. You wouldn't want that guy chomping on you. This is the adult canine just coming through, and this is the milk canine, and you can see how it's kind of crooked. When that was in the gum, the milk canine looked like that, just a little tiny thing. And now it's, so that's where it was on the edge of the gum, and it's slowly being pushed out. And if you see this part here is cupped like that. And the adult canine fits right in there. So as the milk canine is coming out, the two kind of work together. And something happened with my slide. But what I was trying to show, this is supposed to be up here, but what I was trying to show is together, they, as this one keeps protruding and this comes out, together they almost look like a functional canine. Okay, does anybody know the age when the canine is fully erupted on tigers? You probably wouldn't know that unless you've been there. Well, last week, Saxon was asked to go out and catch a tiger that was roaming 10 kilometers from Waikau King. It had been out there for about a week and a half and been killing dogs, chickens, and ducks, and people were pretty worried about it. And it took us 3 or 4 days, and we eventually caught it. It was a 55-kilogram tiger and had full-size canines. And full-size canines they're fully erupted at about 17 months old. So we were looking at this tiger, 17 months old, and it had adult canines and only weighed 55 kgs. So Saxon looked at its pads and said, those pads just don't look like the pads of a tiger in the wild. They were crinkly and broken, cracked. And so he said, I think this is an animal that somebody had illegally in captivity. And I looked at the canines and said, this animal should weigh 150 to 170 kgs at 17 months old. It was a male. And it had a stunted growth. So yesterday I asked the medical doctor about that, and he said, when they look at malnutrition in children, there are 2 criteria. If the child is full size, the size it should be at that age, but very thin, that's a sign of recent malnutrition. If the child is both short and lightweight, that's a sign of long-term malnutrition. Well, here was a short animal, small animal with light weight, and so based on those canines, I think it was an animal that had not been fed enough for a long, long time. Okay, yeah.
ฟังเขาพูดเร็วเขาพูดชัดฟังทันไหมคะชัดเจนไหมคะฟังยากไหมคะอะไรนะคะยากหรือยากไม่ยากเป็นง่วงแต่เข้าใจใช่ไหมคะ
Want me to go start over?
There's a chance.
Okay, and I just threw this in because after you go out and catch an animal, everybody likes their picture taken. Some people stand there with a dart gun like a hunter, and everyone likes their picture taken. That's fine, but this is time to be cautious. If the animal is still really immobilized, that's okay. But if you suddenly get some big boss wanting to come in and the animal starts waking up and it's a little bit hot, now you're into a dangerous time. So we're very cautious about who we allow to come around when we're immobilizing an animal. And Saxon has a rule, no one comes except his team until he's completely finished and he thinks it's safe. And if he doesn't think it's safe, then it's tough luck. So it's just a kind of warning that you're not done until you're completely done. And the picture on your right is Porchai, the guy who developed the snare. And the other guy is a guy who came out here. He had captured more than 30 tigers in Russia, sometimes starting them from helicopters, sometimes snaring them. And he came out here to help us. And he also helped people in Indonesia, in Bangladesh. He's been all over. And he was just dedicated. He loved being in Thailand. He was planning to come back the next year. And he unfortunately died. He was killed by a brown bear. So we all miss him. I like to think about it. Okay, so I guess in the end, I'd like to say that the future of tigers in Thailand depends on humans using the land sustainably and good science. And I think there's a big role for you guys working not only with tigers, but in DMP, helping wildlife researchers. We need a lot more research. We need a lot more activity in the forest. I like to say it something like this, so you can help me translate. But I think researchers are feet on the ground, and the more feet on the ground in protected areas, the less chance for poachers. So we have camera trap teams, we have smart patrol rangers, we have researchers, and I think they all help. Last year we had a research team that actually discovered a poaching incident. So I think it's important. I'd like to see a lot more research in Thailand. Okay, so now I wasn't a big success out of getting people to talk. Now I'm going to get some help from Nancy. So what are some strategies? Most of you aren't working out in the field. Most of you are working with wildlife researchers right now. So what are some strategies you can have to get a strong relationship with the field biologist in the DMP? Now we have to come up with some answers.
Dave, could you tell us again how it is that vets involves you, a biologist?
What?
How did vets involve you in their work?
The first time I ever got involved with a wildlife vet is a biologist working in an Omaha zoo was worried about inbreeding. He had about 30 gaur in Omaha Zoo, and he was worried about inbreeding, and so he wanted to obtain some semen from wild animals. And he went to Nepal, so he needed my help in immobilizing so he could get some semen. That was my first interaction.
Okay.
After he helped me, he told me about some of the dangers in immobilizing gaur. I'd never done it before, so I helped him immobilize it. I got the gaur and the dart gun together, but then once the animal was down, I had no experience. And he talked about bloat, and he talked about how serious bloat was. And so I'll finish that story in a minute, but then I was just planning after that. I was in Nepal, and the very next month I was coming here to help Tirupat start his PhD project on gaur and banteng. So I asked Doug to please come over to Thailand and help us a little bit here. And he agreed.
Okay.
Does anybody know what do you do for float? Somebody? You got a cow or a gower, and its stomach is swelling up with gas. What can you do? Somebody out there.
I see someone. Can you share? What do you do?
What? Puncher, yes. Yeah. Do you know which side? I forgot. The left side? Left side, okay. When the float happened in Nepal, this guy who spent his life working on gaur at the Omaha Zoo tried to put a tube down his throat. He didn't get it down. And I'm saying, you know, I don't know anything, and this guy can't put the... How am I ever going to do the job? And so he had a long needle, he stuck it in, it worked okay. I came up with a solution when I got to Thailand, worked with Tirpa. Now I know that sticking the needle in is not such a bad thing. You do it in the right place. You can teach a wildlife biologist to do that. That's pretty safe. But I didn't know enough to know whether it was safe or not. So Tirpa and I had a very simple solution. When we walked up to the gaur, it was immobilized. One technician and I put the collar on. Meanwhile, Tirpa started pulling out the antidote. The average time that the animal was down after we got to it was 4.5 minutes. We weren't going to have any damn gaur floating on us. We didn't need to measure its ear and its hoof and its tail and its neck. Our job was to put the collar on, so we focused on what the job at hand. And I think that's an important lesson. You really need to think when you're handling an animal what you're trying to do, and be very careful about getting involved with too many experiments and too many extra things. Okay, let's go back to teaching biologists critical skills, understanding what skills and knowledge biologists have that you don't have, understanding what skills you can teach them. Okay, but let's think of some very simple strategies. Let's say you wanted to learn about tiger work. What would you have to do? Maybe it sounds like a trick question. You need to find some reason to go up and visit Kanang Ram Research Station. You need to ask them, can I come visit you? You find some reason to go up and start meeting these researchers. So getting permission to get out of the office and go up and visit researchers. There are people working on immobilizing and putting collars on hornbills, on tigers, on gaur, on banteng, on deer. So you need to get out. Okay, so what about the idea of doing some field work yourself? What can anybody think of some projects you might want to do? Let's say you go up to meet Saxon. You go up to Kanang Ram, you meet Saxon. What kind of things might you do?
ก็ถือว่าถ้าสมมติว่าเราต้องแบบทำงานด้วยตัวเองสมมติว่าเขาบอกว่าถ้าเราไปเขานางรำเราคิดว่าเราจะทำอะไรได้บ้างในฐานะที่เป็นเวท
If you become, we hope after 4 courses, Dr. Parntep will be able to give you a certificate, and maybe we hope that Mr. Chachwan, who's very interested in getting training, so maybe between Chachwan and Parntep, there'll be some help for you to get hired as permanent officers in DNP. If you get hired as a permanent officer in DNP, what level will they be to start? They start at level 5 or something? Huh? Oh, okay. But anyway, whatever, when you start, you need to get promoted. And what do you have to do to get promoted? Yeah, you have to be a nice person. You have to work hard. What else do you have to do? Come on, say.
Difficult to answer.
To what?
Difficult to answer. Answer you first.
develop some initiative.
For the wildlife researchers, they have to produce some research paper. And you guys could be doing, I think there are lots of research that you might propose to do. I asked Dr. Parntep at lunchtime, and I said, what can you learn from collecting scats? So let's say you had a project and you went out and collected gaur scats and started looking for parasites, looking for some disease. That would be an easy project for you to do. Now you're coming up and you're visiting Saxon, meeting his technicians, finding out how to go out and collect the scats. And pretty soon, he may have a question for you, because you're a vet. And he's going to start asking for some help from you, and if you're hardworking, pretty soon he gets to know you. And that might be a good strategy for you. Get out and do some research. Might be that in our project, the funding for this comes from Respond. We're interested in looking for wildlife disease. Nobody in the DNP is looking for wildlife disease, except some people were asked to do some sampling for avian influenza. But no one is doing that on their own in the DNP. So disease detection might be a big possible role for you. Maybe teaching people some safety issues. We're going to talk about safety issues. Maybe someone like Saxon and me need to know not to cut open a big swollen banteng. I already got my lesson from Dr. Parntep. First thing when he talked about his course, he started talking about safety issues for humans visiting carcasses. And he must have thought I was like a caveman here with my understanding of the issues. After he told me that story, I went back to the States. Somebody picked up a mountain lion this year, brought it back, put it on the table in his garage. He's a wildlife biologist. He decided, well, I think I should open it up to see what it died of. He was dead 4 days later from bubonic plague. Now, that woke me up. So there's a lot you can teach about safety. So in the next session, this session, next session, you guys need to become experts on the safety issues. And one of your roles might be, we would like the Smart Patrol Rangers to be like a first line looking for disease. They may not find disease very often. It may be very rare. But if they find something, What should they look for? Maybe you need to find out from Dr. Parntep and some senior vets what to look for. And once you learn what to look for, you need to be training these rangers in many different protected areas, what to look for and what not to do for safety. So I think there are a lot of activities you can get involved with. And I know in Thailand, a very strong system, the boss is the boss. But you guys need to start thinking about some things you can do and guide. You have to do it politely, but Chachwan doesn't know. He said, he asked Parntep, he asked me, he says, what should wildlife vets do? Should they stay in the breeding station? He knows that's wrong. He doesn't, he said that as a kind of a counterpoint. He knows he would like you guys to do more than just stay at the breeding center. But he also needs to know, so if you guys start doing some things, get out there, then you'll help create your own role. And so we have 3 more workshops. If these workshops end up to be useful for you, then Nancy and I and Felicia can go back and say, by the way, we want to continue the training for another few years. Who knows, we might possibly figure out how to do some training that will really be research, but we won't tell Felicia.
I like research.
I just want to follow up. As we know, this is a workshop. And a workshop is different from a training, because in training you sit and you listen and you learn. And that's great. And a workshop is sitting, listening, learning, and working. Okay? So, we heard from Felicia talk about how wildlife vets and wildlife biologists went out in Alaska. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Felicia would anesthetize the sea lion, is that correct? Steel.
Yes.
And the biologists were the ones putting the transmitters on, correct? So only your role was to anesthetize the animals, correct? And if you didn't work with the biologists, what would have happened? Would you have been able to do that job without them there?
Not with just one of me.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
But
So it's critical to have them on the team?
yeah.
Okay.
So there are examples of projects where veterinarians are the ones that immobilize or anesthetize the animals. They place the transmitters. That's all possible, because there are some questions that veterinarians ask that can be answered with transmitters. But usually, we try to be synergistic with those activities, because if I'm going to get information as a veterinarian from a transmitter on an animal about where that animal is moving, that information will also be useful to a biologist. And there's no reason for me to keep that information for myself, only when I can share it with biologists. And so even if the question starts out to be just a health question, it's important to involve biologists to be able to share the information and to really make the most of that information.
Okay. So Dave's a wildlife biologist, and I have seen it many times where he'll go into Felicia and ask a bajillion questions to help him understand the situation. If he didn't have access to a veterinarian, he may not have all the information. When he gave the story about the mountain lion, where the wildlife biologist opened up the lion to see what was in there, and then died 4 days later, he asked Felicia a bunch of questions, and she basically gave, and maybe you can sum it up, what was the whole piece about the bubonic plague? It's endemic, correct?
Yeah. Well, we just talked about plague in the United States. It's an endemic disease normally found in parts of the United States, in some of the prey items that animals like mountain lions will eat. And so it is a known risk factor when you're working with these animals. But because maybe the biologist did not know about the specific area, maybe where the mountain lion came from, or had not been educated about the risks of plague, he didn't know how to take proper precautions. Or maybe he knew about plague, but wasn't aware how to protect himself. So that's a really important role that we have in educating our colleagues about how to properly work with animals and protect themselves.
Right. They rely on each other.
I had an idea, Parntep, I hope you don't mind.
surprise you. You talked about how the knowledge of wildlife disease is very low here. So one of the things that is at the very end of this workshop is assignment for next time. And I was thinking, why can't we divide up the major species and you guys begin to put together a handbook on the wildlife diseases in this region for the list of species. And then, if you start on that, Dr. Parntep can help, Felicia can help. We have a nice network in our project of other vets. We have 2 vet schools involved. And maybe this could be a product to show done by the DNP vets. And, we could have pictures, some idea of the basic diseases, whether the diseases just affect the wildlife, whether the diseases often jump to domestic, or whether they're zoonotic diseases that can go to humans. That could be a kind of a fun project. And we could make a list.
And this kind of activity will also help identify where you need more information, where the critical gaps are in information to help develop research projects. And then you can try to help find funding and try to conduct some research projects to add to the knowledge. Does that sound okay?
I'm a professor, not a very good professor, but my wife is a very good professor, and she's such a good professor, she's now my boss. She's a department chairman. But what advice she gives to her graduate students is find something that you can be the best person in the world. Now that sounds awful ambitious, but she's very serious. Find something that you can be the best at. It can be some small thing, narrow, but something. In your case, this is something for all of you. So there are about 450 vets in Thailand. And all of you, not right now, but over the next 2 or 3 years, can become the experts in Thailand on wildlife disease as a group, so that people know that you guys know a lot about disease. Parntep has a center here, and he'd be glad to keep working with you in this disease center so you guys really have that skill. So I think it would be nice to set your goal high, and then Dr. Parntep, even me, we can put a little pressure on the DNP to start making a good place for you. I have some influence for about 3 years, because my student is now the deputy DG of wildlife, and I'll put all the pressure I can until he tells me to shut up, to try to get a good role for you guys. So let's think about that, some kind of handbook there, and we can get a lot of resources to help. You need a journal article or something.
Okay, so can we follow that up on Thursday?
Yeah.
Okay. Before we go, this is a quick sheet. It's asking you 4 things. Your name, the easy part, your current assignment, where you're currently working and what you're doing, and some of the roles that you're doing in your job. Maybe you're just working with tourists who come through the national park. Maybe you're working with rangers. Whatever your roles are, list out 5 to 7 of those roles. Then I want you to tell me what your current status, your current rapport, or how you get along with field biologists that you are to work with. If you say none, I don't talk to them, I don't know who they are, I've never seen them before, that's okay. If you say I see them all the time, or we talk on email, or whatever it is. And then I want you to give me an idea of what you plan to do to integrate yourself better with the field biologists. How you plan to understand what skills and knowledge they have that you don't. What kind of research they might want to do. Maybe what kind of critical skills you can teach them. How you can work more with them. that make sense? So give me a thumbs up. Make sense? No, I can explain it again. If it doesn't make sense, give me one of these. Or just look at me like this. That'll work too. Okay, good. Okay. The reason I want you to do this is that in 4 months, when we have our next workshop, we're going to see how well you progress. We're going to say, okay, did you do all these things? Let's see. How did you do? Well, how did you do it? What did you do? Etc. Okay. So this is a workshop because we're asking you to work on some critical things, which is interacting with people like wildlife biologists, field, that you can learn to work together. Not saying that you don't already, but maybe prove that. Make sense? Okay. I'm going to hand these out, and then when you finish, please bring them to me.
Nancy, 2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months.
We don't have 4 months. We'll be
Is
going
it
on.
May?
We'll all have gray hair before we finish. We haven't decided. We're going to move it up.
Okay. You don't have to put it. Okay. There should be one for every vet.
How much time do you think about that?
I am giving you 13 minutes. 13 minutes.
ก็ใบที่เขาแจกให้ไปนะคะเขาจะให้กรอกที่ขอดู
Yep.
ถ้าไม่เข้าใจว่าคือมันมี2 อย่างเดี๋ยวตอนนี้เอาแค่เป็น basic information ก่อนนะคะที่แนนซี่ขอให้กรอกตอนนี้ภายใน15 นาทีนะคะก็คือว่าให้ใส่ชื่อหน้าบรรทัดแรกชื่อของตัวเองนะคะชื่อนามสกุลแล้วก็งานที่ทำปัจจุบันนี้คืองานอะไรบรรทัดที่2นะคะอันนี้ที่บอกว่าเป็น current employment นะคะว่างานเป็นงานที่ทำงานอะไรนะคะแล้วก็ต่อมาที่เป็น list needed อันนี้ให้บอกว่าเรางานที่เราทำเนี่ยมันต้องเกี่ยวข้องกับใครบ้างคือมีงานแต่ละจ็อบเนี่ยอะไรบ้างใช้เป็นอันแรกหลักๆนะคะแล้วก็เราทำงานกับbiologist บ้างหรือเปล่านะคะแล้วก็ถ้าทำก็ใส่มาแต่ใครยังไม่เคยมีประสบการณ์ทำอะไรเลยก็ไม่ต้องใส่ไม่เป็นไรนะคะแล้วก็หรือถ้าตอนนี้ยังไม่ได้ทำแต่ว่ามันมีแนวโน้มว่าเราจะทำมันมีแพลนอยู่ในหน่วยงานว่าเราต้องทำอะไรกับbiologistบ้างก็ใส่มาให้ชัดเจนนะคะถ้าไม่สะดวกเขียนภาษาอังกฤษก็ใส่เป็นภาษาไทยก่อนก็ได้นะคะโอเคไหมคะแล้วก็ในมันเป็นซีรีส์ใช่ไหมคะเวิร์กช็อปที่เรามีเนี่ยมันจะมี3เวิร์กช็อปใช่ไหมคะแล้วในครั้งต่อไปมันจะเป็นเดือนพฤษภานะคะตรงนี้เดือนพฤษภาเนี่ยเราคิดในความคิดของเราคิดว่าเราจะมีวางแผนที่จะร่วมงานกับไบโอจิสยังไงบ้างนะคะตรงนี้นะคะตามความคิดของเรานะคะลองใส่ตรงนี้มาก่อนอันนี้เป็นตามความคิดของแต่ละคนมาก่อนนะคะแต่ว่าที่เมื่อกี้ที่เจฟพูดกับดร.บันเทพที่คุยกันถูกว่าจะมี assignment นะคะสองหน้าที่ว่าอาจจะให้เรารู้ว่าเราจะสามารถแบ่งกลุ่มแล้วก็ดูว่าอาจจะตามความถนัดแต่กลุ่มว่ามันจะมีสัตว์สปีชีส์อะไรบ้างที่เราจะดูเรื่องโรคของสัตว์แล้วก็มีเรื่องอะไรบ้างมีรายละเอียดอันนั้นก็เป็นงานกลุ่มหน้าแต่ว่านี่คือเขาคงยังไม่ได้ตกลงกันเป็นอันที่คุณเบสเพิ่งคิดขึ้นมาเมื่อกี้นี้เราก็คุยกันนะคะแต่อันนี้เป็นแค่ขอข้อมูลเป็นเบสิกอินโฟเมชั่นให้คุณแนนซี่ก่อนแค่นั้นเองมีให้สนใจอะไรไหมคะเคลียร์ไหมคะ15 นาทีอะค่ะ
10 minutes now.
เขาบอกเหลือ10 นาทีแล้วล่ะ
In terms of your main responsibilities, it's jobs that you have to do, not people.
เรียนสัตว์ผ่าตรงผ่าซาก job description job description ไงตอนเขียนในนั้นแหละที่เขียนเราต้องมี job description เราเขียนงานที่ทำร่วมกับรัฐบาลก็ได้แล้วเทคนิคการจะโตบาลนะก็ช่วยกันวางแผนในการพัฒนาอะไรก็บอกไป
จะมีมากกว่าเป็น8-9ก็ไม่ได้หรือว่าถึงนี้ก็จะเป็นคอยเก็บข้อมูลไหมสอนไหมมีตรวจรักษา
นี่ไงพี่เขาไกด์แล้วไม่เหมือนเขาฝึกงานนักศึกษาไงแกไม่ต้องฝึกสอนเขาเลย
ต่อหรือเปล่ามีเรื่องอะไรหรือเปล่าเดินตรวจการตัดจับข้างอาบน้ำหรือเปล่าฉีดยาไหมหน้าที่เราที่ทำปัจจุบันห้ามลอกกันแต่ละคนเราไม่มีการถูกปะ
You have 8 minutes.
รู้เปล่าว่าอย่างนี้แปลว่าอะไรอ่ะฝรั่งเขาบอกว่าอย่างเงี้ยแทนสัญลักษณ์ของผู้หญิง
ผมแทงจมูกพี่อยู่
แล้วเวลาคนเอเชียไม่เอาอีกอันไหนเลยอีกเยอะ
ไม่โดนพี่ดี
ขอพูดว่าไม่เย็นไม่ได้ตีทำอะไรกันเดินไปหน่อยนึง
แก
ลอกเหรอผมน่าเกลียดมากเลย
เนี่ยก็ตามเนี่ยถ้าต้องทำอ่ะนั่นแหละทำไปน้องทำอะไรกับพี่บ้างขอบคุณนะ